History 8. This is video number 2 in our little history, I guess we'll call it series. Today we are talking about technology and especially about railroads. And that's kind of where we're at today. There are actually no extra videos for you to watch. You only have to watch this video. Don't forget to send me the code word when we're done. I will give you the code word. And then, yeah, so that's kind of the plan for today. And then you have notes that are 333 to 338, which you will read and then we'll be ready to go for on Monday. All right, so this chapter is kind of talking about like steamships were really good for transportation with other countries, but we needed something else here. And obviously the best way to do it is railroad. And so railroads moved raw materials kind of all across our country, but we didn't have anything that went straight across. You could ride the same train all the way across. And you're like, but there are railroad tracks. I don't understand. So what happened was railroads were not built all with the same gauge. There are different size gauges. And so trains, which is like the width between the rails. And so trains could not travel on all tracks. Certain trains were built for certain tracks and others were built for other tracks. And so because it's not a standard, sometimes, for example, to go from Chicago and New York, there were rails between them all the way, but you had to change trains 6 times in order to get from Chicago to New York or New York to Chicago, and it just wasn't efficient because you couldn't just take a train all the way straight through. And so they decided to make a standard gauge. It's 4 feet 8.5 inches. And so that also allowed trains to go at faster speeds and they could carry heavier loads. Another thing that helped the railroads was consolidation, and that's where you just combine smaller lines. The first person who really did this was Cornelius Vanderbilt, and he, by the way, I have a note, dropped out of school. He borrowed $100 from his mom, bought a boat, and founded his own shipping business, and it transported goods from Staten Island to New York City. This began his journey to becoming the wealthiest man in America. He paid back the $100 loan in a year plus an extra $1,000. He bought or built more boats and gained the nickname Commodore when he operated the largest schooner on the Hudson River. He began building steamships that offered not just transportation but comfort and luxury. His steamships became known as floating palaces. By the 1840s, his business had become the largest employer in the United States. He was nearing 70 when he decided to shift his attention to building a railroad empire. He began buying and combining small rail lines, the New York and Harlem Railroad, the Hudson River Railroad, and the New York Central Railroad. In his first 5 years, he made $25 million. He lost $1 to $2 million trying to buy the Erie Railroad, but quickly made that up by buying the Lakeshore and Michigan Southern Railroad, the Canadian Southern Railroad, and the Michigan Central Railroad. He put together the greatest American railroad system and controlled railroading between New York and Chicago. And he has an estate, Biltmore Estate. I think you can actually go and tour there in Asheville, North Carolina, and that was built by his grandson. There is a university in Nashville, Vanderbilt. There's huge hospitals all named after the Vanderbilt family. So and so what he did is he just kind of bought up all these different small railroad companies. He made them standard, and he put together just this empire. And so other companies decided to do the same. A guy named J. Edgar Thompson did the same thing in Pennsylvania and Ohio. And this is the big thing. He can buy those up, and then he can raise the rates because he's the only railroad in the area. And so that brought some change, but it does help build an efficient railroad transportation network. So then the government kind of gets involved a little bit. The government wants to build a railroad all the way across the United States that connects, and they find a good spot. The problem is we don't actually own that land, and so what they do is they buy what's called the Gadsden Purchase. They buy it from Mexico. So on this little map here, you can see the yellow down here. That's what they buy, and you can see it better in this upper map. You can see they just buy like a small chunk. Because of where the mountains and stuff are there, they thought this would be the easiest place for them to go through. And so they decide to buy this little chunk of land from Mexico so they can put the railroad through there. Now, the only problem is in 1860, is when they're kind of working on this. I don't know if it says the year we bought the Gadsden Purchase. 1853 is when they bought it. And then in the 1860s, they were working on actually putting that route in there. But the Civil War was going on, and that's in the South. And so New Mexico and Arizona. And so they decide to build it kind of more in the middle. And so if you actually look at the map in your book on 329, you will see the Transcontinental Railroad is the middle one. I can actually show you from my book here. Okay, so this one here is, yes. And like right here in the middle is Promontory Point. Well, not in the middle, but you know, right here is Promontory Point, which is where they connected the two. So they do eventually go through the Gadsden Purchase, but that's not till much later. So, and I do have kind of a picture here you can see. Can you see that? This picture shows you like all of the railroads going on by like New York and Chicago and stuff, but we didn't have on the East Coast, but we didn't have them going west. So we needed to make some changes, and that's when they decided to do the railroad. And I also have this one here, which I'll show you in a minute actually. Okay, so they decided to do a transcontinental railroad. They wanted the government to provide the money to build the tracks as well as the land. So Congress charted the Union Pacific and Central Pacific Railroads to build this. And this map is kind of blurry, unfortunately, but you can see. So here, let's see, right here is the green, and then it meets the yellow. Okay, the green is the Central Pacific building, and then the yellow is the Union Pacific. And you might be wondering, why did the green do so little? The green was having to go through mountains to put in this railway, and so it took them a lot longer to meet the yellow. And so they just didn't have to build as much because it took them just as much time. So the Union Pacific did build more technically, but the Central Pacific had so much more to do building through those mountains and stuff. And the Central Pacific actually used a lot of Chinese laborers, which we kind of talked about, like the Chinese coming here and worked on railroads. And so, and most of this railroad, even though it was started before the Civil War, most of it was laid after. The Central Pacific faced the trial, though, of that Sierra Nevada mountains, which is what I talked about. And it just kind of took a long time. They officially finished when they lay the official wedding of the rails when it came together. Was on May 10th, 1869. It's Promontory Point, Utah, which is near Ogden, Utah. The railroads got money for each mile of track laid, and the government also gave each railroad 2 extra sections of land on an alternating sides of the track, and that gave them extra acres of land for every track that they laid. So of course the railroads want to keep laying more track because they keep gaining more land, which gives them money because they would sell this land to either people who wanted to settle there because people want to build towns up along the railroad because you have business, or they sold it to land speculators, and what those land speculators would do is they would buy it for cheap and then try to sell it for way more. So the only problem is this does invite some corruption and scandal, but there wasn't, I don't know how they could have fixed that at the time, I guess. It was hard for them to keep track of that. So one thing, though, that was an issue is that sometimes these railroad companies just built things as fast as they possibly could without thinking, oh, this could rot in a couple years, and they weren't keeping up on them. And so it did cause a lot of expense to taxpayers later because sometimes like the road beds would wash away or tracks would get out of alignment, and the companies didn't take care of it because they just wanted the land that they were given at the very beginning. Because the men who invested in railroads accumulated a ton of wealth, more companies obviously wanted these government land grants so they could continue building. There were more train lines put in. There was one that joined Minnesota to Portland, Oregon, and Spokane and Tacoma, Washington. There was a southerly route that went through that Gadsden Purchase I was talking about. And then when that one was finally finished, it actually linked Los Angeles and San Francisco all the way to New Orleans, which is pretty awesome. And so by 1900, the United States has 5 transcontinental railroads going all the way across. One person, though, that decided to kind of do something different was James Hill. So most of these railroads we talked about were built by government funding. And so this James Hill guy, James J. Hill is his name, decided that you don't have to build using government money. He said you can do it by yourself. And so he created the Great Northern Railroad. He crossed the wheat belt of North Dakota and Montana, and then he extended it up into Canada, which was super smart because there were farmers there who also had to get their products to market. He also, and this is something very different for him and for others, is that he actually would give like the farmers farming techniques and try to help them, and he even would give them seeds to start their crops. And people would be like, why are you helping them out? But it helps his business too if the farms are doing well. So it does make sense. He also tried to keep operating costs as low as possible, and instead of going through the mountains, his line actually went, like some of the trains in some of the areas would go over the mountains or through them, like around and over and stuff. He decided, let's just go around the mountains because it's way cheaper, and we can carry way more if we're not trying to go up. And so that made a huge difference. And his railroad actually paid investors money. They made money. A lot of those other railroads ended up going bankrupt, and his does not. He's very successful. Now, another huge thing that comes out at this time is technology. And a big part of that is just Americans who were inventive and want to make change. They see a problem and they try to fix it. One of these people is Alexander Graham Bell. He makes the telephone. And he makes a lot of other things, including what's called an electrical bullet probe. Now, we have talked about like different presidents who died, like Garfield died just because they kept trying to like find the bullet. He makes this to try and just be able to find it without having to dig, which is kind of gross, but anyway, so that was just trying to make improvements. Another thing invented at this time was rivets for the point of stress. You guys are going to laugh. In Levi Strauss jeans. So Levi was actually, I had a note about him and I don't know where it went. He was an immigrant who came from, I don't remember what country, maybe Ireland. I feel like it's Ireland. Sorry, I had a note in here and I don't know where it went. And so he came over and he invented jeans. But the problem was they had a lot of wear and tear to them. And so he found those little, if you look at like your jeans around your pockets and stuff, there are those little metal things. And those actually are there purposely to keep like them from ripping, and this, because those are major stress spots. And even though that seems like a minor thing, we still use it all the time. Think about like the telephone. Even though we might not use like the wired in telephone all the time, like our cell phones, we wouldn't have those without the original telephone. The number of patents that was issued by the U.S. Patent Office shot up. It used to averaging more than 21,000 patents a year, which is huge. Then, of course, there's the use of electricity that was beneficial to the advancement of industry and technology. And Thomas Edison was the one who really promoted electricity for practical uses. A lot of people thought it was just for the rich, and Thomas Edison kind of makes it for everyone. It led him to invent many electrical appliances. The big one is the light bulb, his incandescent light bulb. There's the phonograph that plays music. He also was one of the leading people involved with film and the movie camera. So those are all huge things that we can be thankful for because of him. Then another inventor is George Pullman, and he worked on trains. Now what he did is he actually made it more comfortable by inventing what's called the Pullman car. It had sleeper berths in it where you could actually sleep on a train, and it actually like converts into beds. So you can kind of see in this picture here. Okay, it's a train car that has beds in it, or that can convert to beds. Pretty cool. So yeah, so those are all just major inventions that made a huge difference. Another one was George Westinghouse made an air brake for trains, and that one is huge because it, first of all, prevents the loss of life, and it also helps trains slow down quicker, and it keeps like accidents from happening. So, you know, it helps train owners keep from losing money that way too. Obviously, this does lead to some danger, and one of those is the love of money over God. They lose focus on what's important, and they're just thinking about money, money, money all the time. And so sometimes the inventors or factory owners would place profit over like safe working conditions. So like, oh, well, he just got injured working. It's okay because I made money, you know. And so people would look to inventors and scientists, unfortunately, instead of God for answers because they were just looking for the fastest way to make money. Now, another big thing during this time was new ways of doing business. I'm going to go through these quickly because I don't feel like you guys want to hear too much more. But so one of the ways you could do business with sole proprietorship. Okay, one person owns the business. Then there are partnerships where two people own the business and work together. Now, proprietorship, it's the advantage of just you make all the decisions, you get all the profit. The problem is if your business goes under, you lose everything. Another thing is if you want to expand, say Kayla, I'm going to use examples for you guys even though you're not sitting here. Say Kayla starts a business, okay? And she's like, oh, I love this business. It's great. I think I could sell even more because I just can't make enough product in this factory. I need to buy another factory. But she doesn't have money to buy another factory. If she had had a partner, her partner would be able to hopefully give her the money to buy factory number 2. But then a partnership has the advantage of increasing capital. You have more money. So if Kayla and say Ava both decide to go into this business together, there's more money to go around. Andrew Carnegie is one of these people who use multiple partners to, and what he would do is he would hire somebody, say he's working on steel, and he's like, well, we use oil when we're doing stuff with steel, so I'll buy the oil company, but I don't know enough about it, so I'll bring in a person who's a professional on oil to be my partner. And so that's kind of what he did. He brought in people that were really good at what he didn't know about so he could keep going with his business. Now, the positives are you have more help and you can obviously bring in people who know more about things and there's more money. The bad part is, say Kayla and Ava are running this company and they bring in another partner, say Laura, okay? And they're all working really hard, but then Laura makes like a huge like $1 million mistake and she causes the whole business to collapse. Well, think about this. Who loses all their money? Nope, not just Laura, even though it was Laura that made the mistake. Sorry, Laura, not picking on you. You just popped in my head. I was thinking of the girls. It's not just Laura who loses money. It's Kayla, Ava, and Laura all lose money just because one person messed up. And so that is one downfall of a partnership. Now, another way that is brand new is an incorporate. It's a corporation. It's formed when a business gained a legal charter and it sold stock to many individual investors. So, like, for example, today, you can buy stock, although I don't know if I'd buy stocks right now because things are kind of rough. You could buy stock in a business. And this is the positive. So, say Kayla has a business and she decides to sell stock. So, Ava, Laura, Hadley, and Angelus can all put in some money towards this business. Okay? Now, this is the positive. I think I got all the girls. Did I get all the girls? Oh, and Alicia. Sorry, Alicia. So they all put in, say, 20 bucks. Okay? Now, if Kayla messes up and the whole company falls apart, do you know how much those girls are all out? Just 20 bucks. The only one who's out way more is Kayla. And so that's the positive of having a corporation is that you are only responsible for what you put in. Now, if the company starts doing better and Kayla like is really on fire and they start making a whole bunch of money, then you get more money as you go. But if there's a mistake and you lose it, you just lose the $20. So it's a little bit more, it's safer for those people wanting to invest. And it is considered like a person in the eyes of the law. And so like the business could make legal dealings without having all stockholders present. That's good and bad. And so a lot of executives right after the Civil War wanted to start these corporations because they had these new businesses that they wanted to start, like steel, petroleum, chemical manufacturers, and there's so many other ones. And a lot of people who had savings or wealth would become stockholders, and another thing is the nation's banking system helped provide business with capital or money. Banks would invest their money in corporations to make even more money. So this is the big thing that people don't realize. Your money, when you put it in the bank, doesn't just sit there. The bank uses that money to give out loans and that kind of thing. And so they can build up how much money they have by investing as well. They also would offer credit to corporations where you could borrow money and pay it back. Another large-scale source of capital came from life insurance companies, and they would invest the premiums. So when you get life insurance is insurance for when you die. It kind of pays for your funeral and kind of helps your family out. And so you invest money or you pay money to have a life insurance policy, and then they can invest that into different things. I don't know that life insurance companies still do that, but that's a good question that I don't know. As corporations grew larger, they obviously needed better internal organization. Early factories didn't really have executives. You might have like one manager and a bookkeeper. Now, obviously, you need more management. You have separate departments, and you have different people in charge of those departments. And so in 1882, an example of this is John. And so they just needed companies to be more efficient. So an example of all of this is John D. Rockefeller in 1882. He was big into oil, and his associates formed what's called Standard Oil. It's the first trust. A trust combines several separate companies into one supersized corporation. And so the executives of this trust, they organize and they manage all of the combined companies as they wish. And so other companies started following this, and it just kind of made a huge mess. So like Rockefeller is involved in oil. But then he would buy other companies out that are involved in like the making of oil or the use of oil, and that way they could keep going and keep making money through the whole process. And so that's kind of how he used it. Anyway, your word for the day is trust. So you're just going to email me the word for the day, which is trust. So I hope you guys have a good day. Email me your code word, get your notes done, and I will see you guys all on Monday.